Hello everyone, it's Jeff Rich here from the Burning Archive. Welcome to this live stream and this video, if you're watching on the replay, of my discussion of, is Donald Trump a candidate, a president, I should say, a president for peace, or is he a president for chaos? As I was preparing this stream, the news came through, the sort of readouts, statements from both the White House and the Kremlin of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's telephone conversation overnight Australian time. And so I'll also be talking about that today as well. And do say hello in the chat. I can see... I can see that Gabrielle Demachi, I think, I have to put my glasses on to see things properly, is watching, and I hope all is well with the stream quality. Last time I streamed, the live chat for some reason didn't work, so I'm really pleased the chat is working and everyone can say hello and all that sort of stuff. And let me just check in on what people are saying there. We've got I'll just maybe pop out the chat so I can actually read it. David K, welcome, and Gabrielle, thanks all for joining me. Excellent. That's really great to hear that the stream quality is fine. Thanks for letting me know. So today I'm going to be talking about both the Trump-Putin call and I guess what that means in terms of where we are with the negotiations to end the war and to build the peace in Ukraine, and more broadly between Russia, the United States, and Europe, and I guess the broader world. And also it's also, I'm also going to be talking about a bit of a 2-month review of Donald Trump's presidency. It's 2 months, pretty much. I think it's about nearly 60 days since Donald Trump took office on the 20th of January for the second time. Trump 2.0, what does it mean? There's been a lot of debate on the internet about that, particularly in terms of his foreign policy directions. There has been a lot of angst within America over what his domestic policy directions are. And I'm going to have a look at both, as well as, I guess, his style of government, what it means, and I'm going to bring my own perspective there from having worked in government for 33 years as a former very, very minor government official, but also someone who's previously worked several times on sort of transition to government arrangements, as well as looking at, I guess, the broad arrangements governments have in place to manage their governments as a whole, the sort of the way in which departments are organised, the way in which the political arm and the bureaucratic arm of government are connected. And I'll sort of bring that into my assessment of Trump's foreign policy directions, his domestic policy directions, and his style of government. But first of all, I think we want to dig in straight away into this Trump-Putin call. And just before I do that, I also just want to flag a couple of other pieces of news that have come through over the last couple of weeks that I think is probably important for people to tune in, as well as the big news around the development of the peace arrangements between Russia and the United States. First of all, and I'm just going to give quick top-line sort of reads on some of these things. First of all, in India right at the moment, I think it's in India. I'm not 100% sure whether it is in India, but I think it is in India. Sometimes these events are held in different places. The Raisina dialogue is happening. That is like, if you like, the Indian version of Davos, the Indian version of the Valdai Forum in Russia. I think there's a similar kind of conference that happens in China. It's really been a key initiative of Dr. S. Jaishankar over recent years, and it brings leading experts from around the world and from India to talk about both international relations as well as India's role in the world and the shape of diplomacy. And there has been a lot of interesting discussions about it. Tulsi Gabbard from the new Trump administration, the new Director of National Intelligence, spoke at the Raisina Dialogue. And First Post is a kind of a co-sponsor, host of the event, and Palki Sharma is doing some fantastic sort of idea pod and broadcasts. So I really do recommend people check that out. And I may do a video over the next week or so looking at things. But one thing that really did catch my eye was the comment by Samir Saran, saying that there were 3 difficult relationships in world affairs right at the moment. And the third most difficult of those was the Russia-Europe relationship. The second most difficult was the US-China relationship. And the third, or the most difficult, the most problematic, the most troublesome relationship in international relations right now is the Europe-United States relationship. I think there are real tensions that are bubbling through, and I think that's coming through at the moment. So I'll talk more about that in videos over the next couple of weeks. But I really think I do recommend viewers go and check out some of the videos on YouTube from the Raisina Dialogue, or just check some of the news coverage of that, including at Palki Sharma's First Post. The second significant development I just wanted to mention, and I'll just bring up a little news here, is the major events that are happening in Germany right now, which relate to its change to its defence spending and also its debt break limit. A number of years ago, I think under Angela Merkel, Germany introduced the a constitutional limitation on its debt break, on the amount of debt it could take out. It was something that was happening in a way around the world at the time. And just overnight, again, Australian time, a couple of days before the German National Assembly, the Bundestag, changes over to reflect the election results held in February, the German Parliament voted with a 2/3 majority required for a constitutional change to remove that debt break, and including that having some higher level of spending. And I can just I just see someone mentioning Pravin Sorny, one of his favourite geopolitical analysts, and I'll definitely check out Pravin. Let me know if you think he's speaking at the Raisina Dialogue 2025. So this is a really big deal, this change. It's a big deal to German politics. It's a big deal to European politics. And what I can also show you is this Financial Times news story that came in today, which goes to the this decision that the German Parliament has approved a $1 trillion spending plan. Now, this has been presented to some degree in the context of a increase of arms spending by Europe, in the context of America withdrawing from its commitment to Europe and the Ukraine war. But it is a lot more than that. There is a commitment to increase defence spending, but there is larger commitments both to increase infrastructure spending and also to raise the borrowing limitations that currently exist on the Länder, the sort of state provincial governments in Germany, who deliver most, like they do in Australia, deliver most of the health services, schools, roads, energy networks. So the threat of Russia is a motivating and a precipitating force for this. But this change actually reflects a broader problem in Germany about constraints on public investment, and in a way the opportunity created by the hostile rhetoric from the United States has enabled Christian Merz and other key players in Germany to take the opportunity to remove this limitation. And if I just scroll down to the article here, it refers to the leader of the Greens Party, saying that they are investing for functioning infrastructure, for security, for Ukraine, for climate protection. Ukraine is only one part of the story. And they are encouraging Christian Merz to be like Konrad Adenauer, the famous chancellor of Germany in the 1950s, who also appears in the television show Babylon Berlin, and who as a character, and this Greens MP is saying you could seize the opportunity to write a new chapter in European integration. Germany is a great country. Make something out of it. So this is, I think, really quite a significant event as well. World politics is not just defined by what's going on in Washington or Mar-a-Lago and what, Trump-loving alternative media might think about that. It is very much defined by the independent decisions and initiatives taken all around the world, in China, in India, and in Europe. Maybe not so much in Australia, but that's a whole separate story, which I might get to later in the stream. Okay, let me just quickly flip back here. And then, so that was a major development. So we've talked about the Racina dialogue and also the European thing. And just on Australia, of course, I should say there has been a pretty heated reaction in Australia to Donald Trump applying tariffs on various, steel and aluminium and maybe some other products in Australia, which is sorely testing the rhetorical positioning of the Austro-Americans in Australia and how Australia thinks about the US alliance. I might do a show about that in more detail before too long. Okay, let me now just pivot to the Trump-Putin call, and let me also just quickly check the chat there. I do note David Kay making a few comments on Germany and auto workers and the nuclear things, but maybe what I might do is do a deeper dive into the Germany situation. I will certainly be doing a deeper dive into that as part of my World History World Tour on Substack at jeffrich.substack a bit later in the year. And if you haven't already, do subscribe to jeffrich.substack, learn from history and live in tune with a changing world. Whatever happens in world politics, we all have to survive day to day, and one of those ways is to, come to peace in your own mind about things that are happening. Okay, let's now look at the Trump-Putin core, and there's been two big pieces of public information, I guess, that have come out about this in the last few hours. There's been a statement by Donald Trump himself. I think it was on Truth Social, and you can see that here. I think you can see all that there, hopefully. And I'll just read that. And then there's also been a statement by the Russian government, the Kremlin, on the Kremlin website, the President of Russia's website, about the event as well. So the statement from Donald Trump reads that this conflict should never have started and should have ended long ago with sincere and good faith peace efforts. The leaders agreed that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, full ceasefire and permanent peace. These negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East. The leaders spoke broadly about the Middle East as a region of potential cooperation to prevent future conflicts. They further discussed the need to stop proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. The two leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. The two leaders agreed that a future with an improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia has huge upside. This includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability. So nothing very specific in that statement, quite a bit of general in principle comments, I guess you would say. And in some ways, the Kremlin statement is significantly more informative. Of course, they are all just different versions of the same meeting. I guess one can't be 100% sure how accurate either of them are, but let's have a look at the detail of what the President of Russia is saying in the press release on the Kremlin website about a telephone conversation with US President Donald Trump. Now, this text is, I believe, generated by Google Translate rather than being an official Kremlin translation. When I was checking it before, it didn't seem to go automatically to an English translation. So there may be a few little infelicities there. So the leaders continued a detailed and frank exchange of views on the situation around Ukraine. Now, interesting that they say detailed and frank. So the commentary in the White House statement, maybe it was from the press secretary rather than a Truth Social commentary, was not especially detailed and not especially frank, but there was a frank exchange of views. And often the term frank in diplomatic commentary means, blunt statement of differences and differing assessments of the situation. Vladimir Putin expressed gratitude to Donald Trump for his desire to help achieve the noble goal of ending hostilities and human losses. Having confirmed his fundamental commitment to a peaceful resolution of the conflict, the Russian president declared his readiness to work together with his American partners to thoroughly explore possible ways of resolving the conflict, which should be comprehensive, sustainable, and long-term, and of course to take into account the absolute need to eliminate the root causes of the crisis and Russia's legitimate interests in the area of security. Very important sentence there. This paragraph in general is very much a restatement, I guess, of what Vladimir Putin has said a couple of times in the last 48 hours or so, maybe last few days following the 30-day ceasefire proposal, saying that the idea of ending the conflict peacefully is, of course, supported, but we need to explore how this is resolved in a way that actually progresses, not just to a media announcement of a 30-day ceasefire, but to a comprehensive, sustainable and long-term peace that eliminates the root causes of the crisis. Then the commentary says, in the context of the US president's initiative to introduce a 30-day ceasefire, which is an interesting way of framing it. It's not a US and Ukrainian agreed position. It's the US president's initiative to introduce a 30-day ceasefire. The Russian side outlined a number of significant points concerning ensuring effective control over a possible ceasefire along the entire line of combat contact, the need to stop forced mobilization in Ukraine and rearm the Ukrainian armed forces, serious risks associated with the inability to negotiate of the Kiev regime, which has repeatedly sabotaged and violated the agreements reached, were also noted. Attention was drawn to the barbaric terrorist crimes committed by Ukrainian militants against the civilian population of the Kursk region. Now, again, this is reintroducing the statements made a couple of days ago by Vladimir Putin that, with a twist, which is the inability to negotiate of the Kiev regime. That is a long-standing theme that, in a way, the Ukrainian government is neither capable nor legitimate to actually negotiate an end to the war or a peace agreement. Therefore, perhaps its patron needs to step in. But also the commentary that there needs to be detail about how to manage a possible ceasefire along the entire line of combat contact, which stretches for 2,000 kilometres, and how is that actually going to be enforced and policed, and also the fact that the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers, and foreign mercenaries, including most likely American foreign mercenaries, perhaps dual citizen American foreign mercenaries, in Russian territory in Kursk are alleged to have committed war crimes, and they can't just be let go and to escape justice. And then he also comments here that it was emphasised that the key condition for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution through political and diplomatic means, noting the difference between those political and diplomatic means, meaning perhaps a change in political leadership or political constitution even in Kiev, and diplomatic means, of course, should be the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kiev. Now, let me just take this down for a second and comment that this is a very important point that has perhaps not really been adequately emphasised by people, that after the 30-day ceasefire proposal, after Ukraine agreed that America put a 30-day ceasefire proposal to Russia, it has both backed away from that, perhaps giving evidence that the Kiev regime is not to be trusted to negotiate a diplomatic agreement, and also America has restored foreign military aid and intelligence information. And what's more, Europe has also emphasised that it wants to step into the breach created by any gaps created by American withdrawal. So the comment that there should be complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kiev is very much a very frank and direct statement from the Russian government. I would interpret it as this, at least, that Donald Trump, we have lost some confidence in the perseverance and commitment and sincerity, perhaps, of your efforts to develop peace, because you have resumed some foreign military aid and provision of intelligence information to Kiev, and you have lost control of your European partners who are doing the same. So let's just return then to the detail of the text to complete this sort of assessment of things. So again, in connection with Donald Trump's recent appeal to spare the lives of Ukrainian servicemen surrounded in the Kursk region, Vladimir Putin confirmed that the Russian side is ready to be guided by humanitarian considerations and, in the event of their surrender, guarantees the lives and decent treatment of the Ukrainian armed forces, soldiers, in accordance with Russian laws and international law. So both laws, which also means, they will be prosecuted for war crimes committed on Russian territory. During the conversation, Donald Trump put forward a proposal for the parties to the conflict to mutually refrain from attacks on energy infrastructure facilities for 30 days. Vladimir Putin responded positively to this initiative and immediately gave the Russian military the corresponding order. So this was emphasised very much in Donald Trump's statement. That's the energy ceasefire. There have been periodic attacks on electricity and other power plants and electricity grids, etc., of Ukraine over some time. The Russian correspondent John Helmer has referred to this as the energy war or the electricity war, and that they have been perhaps less intense over the last couple of months than they had been for, say, the previous 6 months, 6 to 12 months. So this order is a significant concession of it provides Donald Trump something to say that he has achieved some element of an immediate ceasefire, but the extent to which it really affects primary Russian military operations is maybe not so clear. In this sense, perhaps, in classic negotiating tactics, one party is offered something that is important to the other that is not so important to them to give up. During the conversation, Donald Trump put forward oh, yes, I've read that. And then finally, last couple of paragraphs we have here. The Russian president also responded constructively to Donald Trump's idea of implementing a well-known initiative concerning the safety of navigation in the Black Sea. It was agreed to begin negotiations to further elaborate specific details of such an agreement. It wasn't agreed to negotiate the agreement, but to specify, well, what are you talking about? Which is, quite something to say about something which is also described as a well-known initiative. I guess, again, it is providing room for perhaps a concession that is important for Donald Trump's political purposes, perhaps not so important for the actual operation of the military operations. Vladimir Putin informed that on March 19th, a prisoner exchange was carried out, including exchanging servicemen. I'll just glide over that, which is still a humanitarian confidence-building measure. the leaders confirmed their intention to continue efforts to achieve a Ukrainian settlement in a bilateral mode, including taking into account the above-mentioned proposals of the US president. For this purpose, Russian and American expert groups are being created. Now, this is a very important paragraph. And again, it to some degree merely restates the agreement that was made in Riyadh some time ago, that a path towards confidence building and normalization of Russia-US relations would be developed, and Russia and America would establish, agree key parties to negotiate and develop a process to negotiate a Ukrainian settlement. A lot of people have emphasised the fact that they're saying to continue efforts to achieve Ukrainian settlement in a bilateral mode as being a big red flag, that Ukraine is excluded, that the European Union is excluded, and that Britain is excluded. And I would emphasise, I think those are all three separate, if related, parties. And but I think this is more just generally saying that in Riyadh, our governments agreed that we are the two principal parties to this conflict, and therefore we are the two principal parties who need to negotiate the process for getting to a comprehensive, sustainable and long-term peace settlement. It remains my view that where is this statement about, I'll just go back up here, any resolution of the conflict that is comprehensive, sustainable and long-term and eliminates the root causes of the crisis and deals with Russia's legitimate interests in the area of security cannot be between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and the United States of America alone. It must also involve Europe and also Ukraine, as well as do the things that Richard Sakwa described in the interview I did with him last week, and do check that out, which is to end the conflict at multiple levels within Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and Europe, between Russia and the United States, and to some degree between Ukraine, Britain and the European Union. Okay, so let me then return to the fact. Now, the other thing, again, Russian and American expert groups are being created. We are just at the start of this process, and I noted that this is also something that Simplicius, the thinker, has emphasised. But again, it was written down in black and white in Riyadh that a process will be established. There are certain decisions which, to my understanding, have still not yet been made about who are the primary representatives of Russia and America, that will help define that process. That is what these Russian and American expert groups being created actually means. We are at the early stages of a process which could well take months, really, if not longer, even maybe a couple of years. Okay, now, interestingly, again, a very comprehensive statement. This was sort of gestured at by the American statement, but Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump also touched upon other issues on the international agenda, including the situation in the Middle East and the Red Sea region, i.e. not Iran, but America bombing Yemen. Joint efforts will be made to stabilise the situation in crisis areas, establish cooperation on nuclear non-proliferation and global security. This, in turn, will contribute to improving the overall atmosphere of Russian-American relations, such as in the joint vote on the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. Again, this conversation was described by Russia as frank. There's no reference to Iran here. There is reference to Middle East and the Red Sea. The situation around Israel, Gaza, Yemen, as well as the situation around Iran is clearly I think creating significant tension between Russia and the US here, and perhaps part of the frank conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin was Russia saying, if you really want to improve the overall atmosphere of Russian-American relations, you need to rein in what's going on by both your own government and the Israeli government in the Middle East and the Red Sea region. Donald, last couple of paragraphs, mutual interest was expressed in normalising bilateral relations in the light of the special responsibility of Russia and the United States for ensuring security and stability in the world. In this context, a wide range of areas in which our countries could establish interaction was considered. A number of ideas were discussed that are moving towards the development of mutually beneficial cooperation in the economy and energy sector, geopolitical deals, energy deals. Russia and America are both large oil and gas exporters or producers. Donald Trump supported Vladimir Putin's idea to organise hockey matches in the USA and Russia between Russia and American players playing in the NHL and KHL. And as it happens, I have recently been reading about the... Oh, sorry, folks. I hope... where are we? I hope I haven't been... I haven't been broadcasting my live stream feed screen to you, hopefully. But I think that gives you a good sense of where we are with these events. Now, I would say that in general, this is confirming my overall assessment of where we're headed with the Ukraine peace negotiations. That we are in a war termination phase of this war. We are not yet quite at a peace building phase of this war, and as yet there are quite a few differences and quite a few unresolved questions about how the multiple parties to the war want to end the war, what they're seeking to achieve by ending the war, and perhaps some of the early confidence and bluster from Donald Trump reflects a hasty a plan to do a hasty, rapid exit, getting whatever loot it can from Ukraine and dumping the problem on EU and to some degree on Russia, while it moved on to other conflicts in the Middle East and China. I think part of the frank assessment of the views is that that's not going to work, Donald. You need to come up with something better than that. So we're still in very early days. Positive signs, still a very cautious response, an appropriately cautious response given the knock to confidence in American peaceful intentions that have been displayed both within these negotiations, the 30-day ceasefire proposal in itself, but also the events in Yemen and Gaza and some of the hostile rhetoric towards Iran, let alone some of the hostile rhetoric towards economic sanctions on Russia, let alone, economic war with most countries around the world, including poor old Australia. So I think we're still in very early days about the development of this peace in Ukraine. I think there will be significant military progress by Russia over coming weeks and months while some of these processes are resolved. And that's going to put enormous pressure on Europe. And I think a few commentators have been picking up, I think, some of the commentary that I made in some of my earlier videos as well, including the one about the looming refugee crisis, which is that the end of the war may happen sooner than one thinks, or a rapid turn, like the pending likely deaths or surrender of some of the elite troops of Ukraine in the Kursk region may also lead to significant instability within the Ukrainian government. And that I saw Nikolai Petro saying there could well be serious civil conflict erupting again within Ukraine, that the stopping the bullets will not stop the civil strife within Ukraine, the failures of state functioning within Ukraine, the desire for people to, live a better life maybe somewhere else in Ukraine. And there will be very limited capacity from a defeated, illegitimate, extremist and no longer financially and militarily supported regime in Kiev to actually establish and maintain social order in that kind of crisis situation. So it's not a prognosis that I take a lot of joy in making, but I feel this is the likely set of events over the next period of time, and that some of that instability probably also underlies the caution of the Russian government's response, and why they're saying that Kiev has, limited ability to negotiate. It can make statements, but can it actually deliver on any real commitments? Okay, so that's my sort of overview, I guess, of the overview of the situation there in Ukraine. And let me just quickly check my script to make sure I'm sort of on track. And maybe if anyone wants to throw in any questions now, that would be fantastic. I'll just look back over the chat and see what people have to say. Here, I'll just put on my glasses so I can actually read it. And I can see Gabriel Demachi and David Kay saying hi, which is great. Peter Kovic, hi Peter, lovely to have you on board. David Kay, speaking of India, Pravin Sawani is one of my favourite Indian geopolitical analysts. I will definitely check him out. David Kay, Germany floating the idea of possible German joint ownership of the UK's nuclear arsenal was farcical. UK, yes, but I guess there's the possibility of the French nuclear arsenal. I think one of the challenges facing Europe, and maybe I will address this in one of a separate video another day, is that it's not just about the spending or the big high-profile weapons of deterrence like nuclear missiles, it actually needs to develop a coherent defence strategy. Now, which is not dependent on the United States. My assessment of what's going on in Europe is some European leaders are waking up to the fact that they've become a launching pad for American offence, not a continent all ranging its own defence. And of course, the best form of defence is diplomacy with your neighbours. So I think Europe will ultimately, as events unfold, slowly develop a kind of a independent defence strategy and an independent diplomatic strategy. I think the events of the last few months are actually, I mean, this is as much a split as occurred between the USSR and the People's Republic of China in the 1960s. I think the relationship between Europe and the United States will not ever go back to what it has been over a long period of time, and people should really stop treating the Europeans as children or emotional fools. They are dealing with a complex and confusing and extremely uncertain situation. I think they are actually starting slowly to take steps to change things. And in that regard, I noted that Angela Merkel made statements during the week broadly along those lines, that there should be a more independent European foreign policy. And also there have been multiple reports over the last few days of how the Estonian, former Estonian Prime Minister Katja Kallas, the foreign minister is not the actual title, but the foreign minister of the European Union, is on pretty shaky ground and is sort of losing confidence of some of the major powers, including Germany, Italy, and others. And as events may unfold, it may well be that this sort of extreme new East European Baltic state diplomacy, aggressive anti-Russia diplomacy, which is to some degree in cahoots with Britain, which is no longer part of the European Union and hence entirely dependent on NATO and aggressive military posturing with other people's weapons and soldiers for its international influence. The Britain and the East European states are in a sort of toxic, dependent relationship, and they're distorting the foreign policy and defence policy objectives, I think, of the European Union. I think over time we're going to see this sort of growing coalition between Merz and Meloni, possibly a different government in France before too long, and other significant players, including Viktor Orban, to sort of reposition European diplomacy to a more sovereign, autonomous path. But, that's my read of events. I could be entirely wrong. After all, I'm a long way from Europe here, but that's how I see things. But yeah, really great comment, I think, from David Kay, and also commentary about German auto workers. Again, I really do encourage people to check out Adam Tooze's discussion in his recent podcasts of I think the podcast last weekend was about this whole German debt limit and the politics of it and the economics of it, and the fact that the direct defence spending component of it is a relatively minor share. And the perhaps more significant thing is to have more fiscal autonomy and it's a manageable level of debt, and it will go into much needed sort of public investment. So interesting sort of thing. And he's also done some interesting discussion about just how significant the sort of wind back in the auto industry in Germany is, deindustrialization. He's a kind of progressive, green affiliated economist, I guess, Adam Tooze, but he is sharp as a tack and really well worth reading about or listening to about these sort of matters. David Kay also comments on the Frank Exchange Review Code for Contentious Discourse. Good pick. Joshua Pym says, sadly, I can't see that happening in the UK. The US is too embedded in our establishment. Yeah, well, I do think it's important to see Britain and the United States as separate. Britain is having left the EU, it is now dependent upon NATO and its special relationship with the United States. I think it has a totally insane attitude towards Russia. And no doubt interests it is pursuing also in Ukraine. Rio Tinto, which we know well in Australia here, is a British company, is one of the world's largest miners. And I think Britain is in for some hard times. And then also Joshua Pym says, we have, I think, 12,000 US troops permanently stationed here. Yeah, well, and like there's, 40,000 troops in Germany. It really is a scandal, I think, the US military presence in countries all around the world. A lot of people talk about American primacy and just kind of accept as their default setting that, think tanks in America can sort of, and politicians in America can have these sort of, safe discussions in their lobbies about, their positioning and their military posture everywhere in the world, what their national interests are in every country in the world, their military bases I think it's over 55 countries, 800 odd military bases around the world. And this is really the result of the post-1945 partition of Eurasia, the extraordinary global expansion of America's undeclared empire in the 10 or so years after 1945. The construction of the American security state and the new American Cold War empire, and that's the brutal reality that people are talking about when they talk about American hegemony, American-led world order. It is actually all those soldiers stationed all around the world. I guess people around the world, I think, are starting to question whether that really helps anyone, apart from, I guess, the military institutions and certain political leaders and businesses in the United States of America. And I've actually got a video coming out, I think later this week, about the whole partition of Eurasia, which in a way will also anticipate my video that I'm doing as part of my End of Empires series on the post-1945 world order. So, yeah, great comment by Joshua Pym about that. And there's been pushback from Starmer on the Ukraine policy, but he is an Atlanticist at heart and will fall in line, I think. Yeah, I think so. Ultimately, they will have few options. I think they're probably hanging out to push things as far as they can go and to get what they can out of the deal. again, I think Britain, I think people need to treat this as Britain has war aims in this conflict too. The European Union has war aims in this conflict. They're trying to settle those as well. They are, in a way, adjusting to the new war termination phase and trying to work out, well, what do they need to do? And Britain can be prepared to be militant because it's not going to have the same, bear the same economic and social and domestic policy responsibility as the European states for actually managing the collapse of Ukraine and the exodus of people from Ukraine, the problems of actually integrating Ukraine, a poor country, poor, corrupt, broken, shamed country, into the European Union. That is going to be a challenge as big, if not bigger, than integrating East Germany into West Germany with the reunification process after 1989. So, great comment from Joshua. Arturus says, very good podcast. Thank you very much. Epic Pog says, what is the end goal of France and the UK's response to the war? Yeah, well, that sort of relates a little bit to what I'm saying there about the war aims. I think there is this principle that American analysts will often invoke that domestic policy is always primary in foreign policy, that the best way to explain a lot of foreign policy is by saying, well, what are the domestic policy considerations? People are very used to doing this in relationship to the United States policy, the role of the Israel lobby, the role of the Ukrainian and Polish East European emigre populations. The business interests related to war. Some of these domestic policy considerations do play a significant role in foreign policy considerations, not exclusive, I would say. I think in France, this is a factor. I tuned in a week or two ago to a little bit on YouTube of a French National Assembly debate where Marine Le Pen flagged a different approach to the Ukraine war and negotiations, but also a different approach to issues like the European army and the sharing of the nuclear deterrence and all that kind of stuff. I feel Macron's very aggressive comments in recent days probably also reflect a desire to rally around the flag, so to speak, to rally around the Russian threat, to attempt to portray Marine Le Pen as, pro-Russian, anti-France kind of thing, given that there is still a lot of, within France itself, a lot of residual, probably anti-Russian sentiment as well. So I think that is probably the case. I also think Macron has had, and France probably generally has had, long-standing interests in strengthening both the political and military integration of the European Union to make it a more effective kind of state. I think there is good argument to make it a more effective state. I think there are probably different models to consider around that, but I also think that is probably the case. And France also has a significant defence industry and will be seeking to profit, I guess, from a military Keynesian sort of way from a rearmament in Europe, even if that rearmament is, if it's presented as a response to a hostile Russia, but is in fact under the surface of political rhetoric, in fact, repositioning European defences as genuinely defensive, with a view to a longer-term diplomatic re-engagement with Russia. And I think Britain, I suspect, is a little bit what I was saying before, but I think it is. I think there's a clue in the 100-year agreement between Britain and Ukraine, which reportedly has secret elements related to mineral resources. I think Britain has long had this sort of fantasy of controlling the Black Sea, and I think some of that is in play as well. I think all the European states and Britain are thinking about, well, what do they salvage out of a ruined Ukraine? How are they going to be positioned out of a ruined Ukraine? America has taken a very we're out of it kind of perspective, and that's also encouraged Europe to come in as Ukraine's best friend, its only loyal friend at the end, the one that it really ought to partner with economically. So I think behind some of the rhetoric is a real sense that standing with Ukraine also has benefits for these countries. So I hope that sort of gives some sense of how I see things, at least Epic Gog. But I do think it is important for people to actually ask the really good question that Epic Pog has asked, which is, what is the end goal of France and the UK's response to the war? I think they too are, if you like, defining short, medium, long-term aims for the resolution of this conflict, recognising that they're not really in control of events as well. And then we have Arturus. I agree that the US-Russian bilateral agreement on the Ukraine issue will not solve the conflict without Europe and Ukraine on board. The EU had invested a lot on their anti-Russia posture. I agree that US-Russian... Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, Ukraine and Europe are neighbours. In the end, Russia and Europe are neighbours. And in the end, all those energy pipelines, all those long-standing cultural, institutional, people-to-people connections will triumph, I think, over this horrible, toxic, anti-Russian mentality that has just infected Western elites, and for which, frankly, the United States is sort of bailing out now. But the United States and its dominant elites in both foreign policy and culture and politics bear heavy responsibility for cultivating, as does, Britain, perfidious Britain, as I think John Helmer refers to them as, perfidious Albion. They are heavily invested rhetorically, but I also see that report about Foreign Minister Callas's losing support, losing credibility, a bit of a whispering campaign against Callas by some of the major European states, including Hungary, which again is a neighbour of Ukraine, has potentially interests. If Ukraine does crack up entirely, has interests in protecting the Hungarian minorities in Ukraine, and there's been meetings and discussions in recent days about the extent to which it's not just the Russian peoples of Ukraine that have suffered persecution over the last few years since 2014, but also the Hungarians and the Romanians and others. So I do think that these things will ultimately lead to a new diplomatic engagement. Once, if you like, I think the process has to begin with the United States and Russia. The United States hasn't been honest enough to say, yeah, we started the war, we have to end it. It's still presenting itself as somehow a broker for peace. But that's okay. It's very clear in the discussions that that comment from the Russian government that all military aid and intelligence sharing has to cease if you want a peace. You need to stop being a party to the war if you want to negotiate peace. I think that it does need to start there, but that will then open up the possibility for the more measured, moderate states within Europe, Hungary, Austria, Slovakia, Italy, Spain, and others to sort of reposition themselves from this rhetoric to say, Britain, stop interfering in European affairs, you're just causing us grief. And for Poland, which is experiencing its own, political problems at the moment, also to perhaps step down from its very, very anti-Russian sentiment and maybe just focus on how it manages the province of Galicia at some point in the future. Okay, then we have your comment, Archerus, about not seeing how they can reverse that posture. It is that they will need to reverse that posture, but again, I think Angela Merkel's recent comments saying that we've got to talk with Russia. Angela Merkel was Christian Merz's, was sort of beat Christian Merz to the chancellorship. She would have known Christian Merz for years. I think it's not insignificant that on the cusp of Christian Merz becoming Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel has made comments which can be seen to be suggesting Europe should return to a more independent path it had under her chancellorship, where a door of genuine diplomacy is opened with Russia, even though that does involve a significant scaling back of the hostile rhetoric. But ultimately, when you lose a war, the ideas do get dropped after a while, and that can change on a dime once events change the situation for people. There won't be a whole lot of point standing with Ukraine and denouncing Russia once they have comprehensively won the war. Politicians are inherently respond to the situations they are in. They are inherently trying to see how far they can push a certain situation to pursue certain objectives. The extent to which they've pushed the Russian objective to, loot and colonize Russia has been a catastrophic failure. They must all recognise that. They must all recognise what a problem they've created for their own independence, for their own economies, for their own societies, for their own public finances. They're going to be wearing the problem of Ukraine for decades. And ultimately, Russia, and through Russia also China, will be the answer to Europe's ultimate recovery from its breakup from the United States of America. I also could be wrong. I think I don't see Britain changing anytime soon. It's had this toxic, aristocratic contempt for Russia for, I'd say since, the 1800s, if not before. And when I say the 1800s, I mean literally the Napoleonic War era, where, it was really Russia who liberated Europe from Napoleon, not the Duke of Wellington. And and Britain perhaps never really forgave Russia for that. And then Epic Pog says, with those domestic concerns considered how could Trump realistically navigate a peace deal? Now, that is a great question. And let me just have a little sip of tea. I think my initial plan for this stream was to do a bit of a review of Donald Trump's presidency, both domestic and political. And I don't know, we've been going for an hour and a quarter so far, so I'm not sure I'll be able to really do that. What I might do is either do another stream or create a separate video in the next couple of days that does that for you. But let me talk a little bit about Epic Pog's question. Thanks, Icarus. I'm glad you learned a lot. That's awesome. Fantastic. That's what I'm here for. Let me show you the old bit of promoter. So we can all learn a lot from history, but also learn a lot from reading the news in a way that is often not done in popular, both alternative and mainstream media, which is, I guess, with a view to what the real issues for the governments involved are. But yeah, at jeffrich.substack.com, you can learn from history and live in tune with a changing world. You can join for free, and you can also join as a paid subscriber for just $5 US a month or $50 US a year. If any of the content here sort of resonates with you, do consider becoming a paid subscriber at jeffrich.substack. It supports my work. It helps me produce more of this. I do all of this all on my own. It's my only, means of financial support at the moment, and it's a real joy to do it. But at the Substack, of course, I'm doing a world history tour of world powers all through 2025. We're looking at the United States, almost at the end of the world history tour of the United States. China's next, and I think I'm looking at India, Europe, and Russia, as well as a few glimpses into the Nobel Prize for Literature and literary modernism or cultural modernism, the sort of way we actually see the modern world, whether that's actually disappearing as we speak, as well as the unipolar world as well. So I'd love to see you there, and you can join me. And I've just been on the Substack later today. I will be bringing out a piece on Barack Obama's presidency, and I guess the extent to which Barack Obama's failures reflect broader failures in the American state that are also affecting Donald Trump. Thanks everyone. Thanks for thanking. It's really great to hear that. It's really encouraging for me too to hear that the kind of things that I'm sort of saying here are resonating with you. And the thing I love even more than doing the videos, not being really a natural performer, I think, is, or certainly not a natural on-camera performer, is the writing I do at substack.com. And so you can get my weekly history book recommendation on Saturday, my weekly deep dive. For paid subscribers, get the full deep dive that goes into the issues raised in that history book in a little bit more detail. And also you can participate in my slow read of Olga Tokarczuk's The Books of Jacob, which in a funny way has a resonance to what's going on in the United States today. And later in the year, I'll also be looking at the great Indian epic, the Mahabharata. So all those things you can get at substack.com, and I hope you could learn a lot from that. All right. And I can see Karim saying, I'm supporting you financially and I encourage others to do the same. Your Substack is marvelous. Thank you, Karim. That's wonderful to hear. And if I'm guessing you might be Karim from Canada, and Interesting developments in Canada, of course, today, over the last couple of days with your new Prime Minister, if I remember correctly. The former central banker of both Canada and Britain, who again, listening to Adam Tooze's podcast is really quite interesting. I think it was Adam Tooze's podcast. He actually talks about some of his personal meetings with the new Canadian Prime Minister and gives a pretty robust assessment of how the Canadian Prime Minister will deal with the American government over the various tariff wars over there. So I think it's probably upside news for Canada, not such great news for the United States. So do check it out, and thanks for your support, and I'd love more people to join me over there at substack.com, jeffrich.substack.com. All right, so maybe what I might do is, rather than do the full thing on Donald Trump today, maybe just wrap up a little bit with the overall assessment, particularly around the foreign policy questions. And I might come back to this question of Donald Trump and whether he's a peace candidate or whether he's a chaos candidate. Broadly, my view is I think, the USA could well be headed into a period of chaos. 10 years of chaos even. And I've been reading a history of China's transformation after the Cultural Revolution, where and the Cultural Revolution, which happened in China really between like the mid-1960s and mid-1970s, and it was, disastrous in many ways for many people in the country, but was also the period during which the famous Kissinger strategy, or the legendary Kissinger strategy, occurred. That period is known in China these days as 10 years of chaos, and I wonder, in a way, if what's going on in the United States is a little bit like what was going on in China in the 1960s, obviously with significant differences, but with an aging leader who's lost the confidence of many key decision makers and pragmatic elites around the country, and reliant on a kind of ideological energy from fanatical supporters, in Mao's case, Red Guards, in Trump's case, the MAGA movement, and implementing a strategy that is deliberately sort of breaking down the people who were the pragmatic realists who occupied the bureaucratic position, who they saw as the bureaucratic elites. Mao talked about bombarding the headquarters. Donald Trump talks about dismantling the deep state. And I wonder whether in both foreign policy and domestic policy, what we're actually seeing in the United States is a pretty chaotic, confused, incoherent set of reactions that are impulsively driving and if like tactically driving revenge and retribution and immediate political advantages, but that are variously tapping the forces of chaos and order in a sort of fluctuating way. And I think I can explore that a little bit more on the domestic policy front, particularly around the whole Doge thing, perhaps in a later video. But I think that's also perhaps what we're seeing with the foreign policy front and why it's difficult to really assess whether Trump is going to be a candidate for peace or a candidate for chaos. And I think when you read that media statement from the Russian government, or the readout of the telephone conversation between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, you get a sense that Russia too is trying to kind of work with some of the positive impulses from Donald Trump. The noble intention to negotiate peace and stop the killing, while also saying, stop the madness, guys. You can't negotiate peace with us if you're supplying arms and intelligence things for terrorist acts against Russians. So I think there is this real erratic nature to Donald Trump's presidency in both domestic and foreign policy that is really driving things forward. And I don't think there is a coherent grand strategy. I think there is some sort of instinctive desires, an instinctive belief in greatness, a distinctive belief in big is better. Let's take Canada and Greenland, and then we will be the biggest territory in the United States. It's been a long time since the United States expanded. Let's expand our territory dramatically by, taking over Canada, turning its 10 provinces into a single state, and taking over Greenland, whether Greenlanders want it or not. So I don't think there is a coherent grand strategy to Trump's presidency, and I think he hasn't yet quite bedded down personnel and institutions and processes really to conduct, orderly diplomacy. But I think what does seem to be happening, he's at least smashed the door open, said he's here and said, let's talk. And the Russians have said, oh, okay, let's talk. But let's talk in a polite, civil way without breaking doors down, folks. And are slowly perhaps leading him to more productive outcomes. So I think if we see it as reliant upon Donald Trump alone, or the United States alone, I don't think Donald Trump and the United States alone can get to a peace. I think Donald Trump's energies and some of his instincts and some of his motivations, when partnered with others outside of the United States, Russia wanting peace, arguably some more sensible voices in Europe wanting enduring peace, I think then a peace process is generally likely to result in a positive outcome. So it's a little bit like what Richard Sakwa said in the interview to me the other day. I think that the Trumpian factor should not be underestimated. Sometimes, a bit like Mao's, when Mao and Zhou Enlai and others in the Chinese government, in the midst of the Cultural Revolution, said, well, why don't we talk to China, to the United States about, some sort of rapprochement. They weren't doing so with a clear end point, or the end point that they had in mind wasn't necessarily the end point that events actually led to. They were sort of brought to the table for all sorts of strange reasons. Mao hated the Soviet Union. Mao thought the Soviet Union was the rising power and the United States was weak. Mao was directly worried about the Soviet Union invading China and challenging it for its dominance in the third world. None of these things were actually realistic assessments of the situation, but they led to a different process, a different outcome, which didn't, achieve itself. I mean, it was 6 to 8 years after Nixon went to China that the United States actually established diplomatic relations with China. So the way the story is told actually often gives you a very misleading sense of what actually happened. And I think we might actually, in a way, be seeing something similar. Some big ideas, big, vague, emotionally driven, not very coherent ideas from Donald Trump might just push processes in certain ways. And when married to a more realistic and coherent assessment of things, like what's happened with the ceasefire proposal, ceasefire proposal is a noble intention, but how are we going to implement it? And what does it mean for this? And what does it mean for that? And how does it actually lead to something rather than just a big announcement? I think marrying that with some of the changes in multilateral relations around the world with BRICS and Russia and China, changing that with some of the key leaders around the world like Narendra Modi and all the rest of it, linking that to some of the imperatives of the United States to actually start reducing its defence spending. I think it could actually ultimately lead to a peace, but I don't think it's going to happen in weeks. I think it's going to take months. And in the meantime, it's always possible that some of that erratic decision-making, some of the grandiose impulses, some of the frankly aggressive, brutalistic foreign policy, like the tariffs, like the bluster about Greenland and Canada, could blow the whole thing up, like the bombing in Yemen, or potentially some sort of complicity in an attack on Iran could easily blow things up. So that is a little bit of a ramble. I got to say, I'm starting to get a little bit tired. So I think what I'll commit to all viewers to do is to do a video maybe in the next couple of days that looks a little bit more systematically at what I promised to do, which was a bit of a 2-month review of Donald Trump's foreign policy, his style of government, and his domestic policy, particularly looking at Doge. There's some very interesting remarks about that in recent days. And Doge being the spending cuts. And let me just do one last little look back over some of the comments people have made here. Thanks again very much for Kareem for your kind words. Thanks to GSP for thanking me for the stream and enjoying the content. And Vaquero Supreme, indeed, dark days ahead for America. More accurately, more dark days ahead. Yep, indeed. Perhaps even 10 years of chaos. I think that is a great comment, Vaquero Supreme, to maybe end the stream on. Thank you for your comment. And, of course, one doesn't wish dark days on America, but perhaps maybe America does need to realise the costs it imposes on itself and on the rest of the world of its of its, its policies of American primacy, to realise, as I think I commented in the video I released on Monday about American primacy has fallen, that it simply isn't dominant in the world anymore, that the policy of bullying the world into submission is not sustainable anymore, and that it's actually not good for America. And that's also a topic I've covered on a Substack over the last couple of weeks, looking in particular at health policy in America as well. So I hope there are not too many dark days for America, but I guess you need to go through the darkness to return to the light, and perhaps America needs to go through some of those dark days to learn the lesson it really needs to learn to live with the rest of the people of the world on equal terms. Thanks everyone so much for watching, and I will be back soon. I'll also probably release segments of this live stream in little videos during the week. Do check out jeffrich.substack.com for all my content, and I'll be back again real soon.